Welcome to the Purpose Over Profit podcast with Darren and Chris, where each week we discuss what it takes to live a life of purpose and profit and explore the lives of people trying to achieve just that.
So welcome back to the Purpose Over Profit podcast with myself, Chris, and as always, I'm with my co-host, Darren. How you doing, Darren?
Yeah, I'm really well, mate. Really well. Looking forward to this one.
Fantastic. And with us today, we've got Eloise. Eloise is somebody who I've worked with before on a couple of projects as well. She's fantastic. She's a linguist, a fantastic copywriter, a fantastic strategy person as well. And she's just recently moved back up to Edinburgh as well. So it's good to see her in her new settings. How are you, Eloise?
I'm really good. Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, very happy to be back in the city.
Oh, fantastic. And today we're just going to kind of catch up about, let our listeners know about your kind of background, your evolution into where you've come just now, because I know you kind of worked on agency side and you've been traveled the world as well. You've lived abroad as well at one point. You're now back here as well, back home. You've recently moved from your parents back up to Edinburgh as well. So it's a bit of an interesting conversation, and you seem to be thriving at the moment as well, which is fantastic.
Thanks, you're making me sound, I'm going to get you to do all of my PR for me in the future, Chris, because you're making me sound like I'm some sort of globe-trotting entrepreneur, and I would hate to give anyone the impression and disabuse them of that. But no, like you say, I have just moved back up from being with my parents, which is every 30-year-old's dream, although my parents are fantastic people, so there's no complaints from my end, and we're all at that age where it's totally fine. Just get a little bit tipsy with your parents most days of the week because lockdown, and you're at that age where you can all chat for wine and be, one of those things. But no, being at home was brilliant and was quite nice actually, to be with family during the lockdown and the pandemic. So able to kind of look after mum and dad, not that they need it at all. But for my ego and my sake, it was nice to do. So yeah, no, very good.
I loved as well, one time we were working on a project and you mentioned that you had a Costa in your hand, and I was very jealous. And you mentioned your dad just done a coffee run just out of the blue and just brought your Costa straight to your door when you were sitting working away. And that is a fantastic relationship you got there.
Yeah, he's brilliant actually. And when it comes to talking about purpose, I think one of the reasons that I do some of the things that I do is all because of my folks and some of the examples that I got growing up. My dad actually used to work he worked in the financial services industry for a long time, but his job was always selling to salespeople, which I thought was a really cool role to do, because it's not something that you're selling to people that are struggling to sell potentially, or you're selling to people who need your advice to get the best results for their customers. It's kind of like B2B sales in that sense. But I think one of the things that he was really good at, and this comes back into the coffee story, is that he was very good at anticipating what people needed before they'd even known to ask for it. Fantastic. And I think there's something really lovely about doing that for my clients. Hopefully, she says, all confidence, but hopefully if I can do that for my clients, anticipate what is it you need before you need it. If I'm introducing you to a new copywriting formula and you don't want to listen to me rabbit about it, I can prepare and explain a document, fire that over with the email that says, look at this at your leisure. And if you have any questions, let me know. And that way, they've got the information at hand. But thinking about what does this person need before they need it, it might be a little flat white from Costa when they're having a fairly hectic morning, but it makes people feel seen and appreciated. And I think that feeling just makes everything so much better. It's that positive feedback cycle, and I think that's one of those things that I saw growing up, and that hopefully has filtered into my work and that I get to do for a long time to come.
Yeah, that's lovely. I think like hearing, everyone wants to be seen, heard, and recognized as part of the kind of human condition, I guess. But when that happens, it might just be something as innocent as a coffee. But when that happens, it makes you feel like an individual and seen and recognized in some sort of way, like somebody gets me, which is lovely. It's a great story. I love that. And you're all about as well. I had a look at your website as well. It's about, I've always been told, and you can tell the irony in this sentence, how I'm building it up. I'll use 100 words where I need to use 10. But part of what you're kind of, as a linguist, I guess, and specialist in that area, is helping really listen to what people are trying to get across in terms of their message and helping them do that in a better way as well.
I love what I do, and I feel so grateful to be able to do what I do. no idea I could do it, which I think is the irony in it all. But yes, I think that, so my consultancy, Olim, is all about helping people close the gap between what we think we're saying and what is actually being received by people. And I think that, as you mentioned earlier there, Darren, about the human condition is so often what we say is misinterpreted, or it doesn't come across in the way that we want it to. We use 100 words where 10 will do. I'm definitely guilty of that. But there's definitely something about being a mirror for other people. And a lot of people say, oh, you must be really good at writing, you have some really great ideas and be really insightful. Not really. I mean, I really strongly say no. What I do is I hold up a mirror. And what I want to do in the process that I go through with my clients is very much that when we do the scoping, we do the groundwork, is really to play back what I hear them saying. And in many ways, it's just a consultancy session to say, look, this is a third party view that comes in that hopefully shines some light on areas you hadn't considered, asks you to question things in a really gentle, non-interrogative way, but in a way that helps you to uncover things for yourself. And I think that kind of process of inquiry, that positive inquiry, helps other people to realize the value they offer to others. So I always use this example, but it's because I hope it's a good one. But if you work with an accountancy firm, for example, and you ask them what their points of difference are, or what is it that makes them special? Why do your customers do business with you? And they say, oh, well, it's because I'm trustworthy and I'm good with numbers. and I'm sat at going, oh, are you sure? Because frankly, if you're going to be my accountant, there's not a given. I want you to be good with numbers. I want you to be trustworthy. But when we spoke to them a little bit further, and I say we, I mean I, but when talking with the team and asking them to really get under the skin of what it is that their customers say about them, we came out with the phrase, actually, we offer you financial serenity. Because customers were saying, I can give you my accounts and I can give you the mess of spreadsheets and I can send you my receipts, and you take all of that mess and you put it into something that I can send off to HMRC with no worries at the end of the year, or you make sure that my business is all 100% spick and span. And I don't have to think about it. I can go into my everyday with the serenity, knowing that I haven't got to think about my accounts. And that's priceless. And that, people make an emotional decision about buying stuff, and then they try and justify logically why it's a good idea afterwards. So that emotional resonance piece is so important. And that really is the purpose of my work, is to help you find a message that will resonate emotionally with your customers, or that your customers will pick up on and be inspired by, because ultimately that means you're doing the right thing for the right people. The people that respond emotionally to the messages that you put out are the people you should be serving. And if there's a disconnect there, you're either looking at the wrong target market, or your message isn't clear enough to connect with the right people.
I think that's fantastic, because you touched upon something there which is lovely. It's the emotional aspect. And I think with a lot of clients, similar to yourself, I mean, I've seen you work with one of the clients as well, where you talk about the emotional aspect. And when you start to unpick it from a client's point of view and you're talking to them, they get quite emotional as well, because you're like a therapist to a point, you're kind of picking away the layers to understand what's going on. And then emotionally, they start to see the stuff they offer as well, and the benefits they offer and the pain points they relieve. And then over time, you get to realize the services they provide. And then by reflecting, like you say, in the mirror aspect, then they see the benefits they bring, and they see they are different from a competitor or somebody else, and they offer something more. And then that is reflected on the customer as well. So it's that lovely feedback cycle, which is fantastic. And you see them getting quite emotional at first. They find it quite hard to engage in that conversation. But with your skills and your talent, there is difficulties, but it must be quite rewarding for them as well.
I hope so, definitely. And I've had great feedback from clients that have either said, we've finally managed to put words to something I've been trying to name for a really long time. We've been able to articulate something that I've always struggled to put into words, and that is hugely rewarding. That is just the best thing about the work. And I always again, my dad, a bit of a theme here, but I was speaking to him about the work that I was doing the other day, and he was saying, you're addicted to doing the work because you like to help people. It's not necessarily like a financial thing, well, that's always lovely, it's my means of employment. It has to be financially viable. Actually, I really struggle to say no to work because I want to help people. It's never about, I want to go on a yacht to Miami. You can tell I have no idea what I'm doing in that situation. I would definitely fall overboard. But there's a lot in there that, I'm not necessarily a targets-driven person. But what I am really motivated by is helping people. And the feeling of helping a client go, right there, that's who I am, that's me, that's what I sound like, that is just the best feeling in the world, and it is addictive. And I think that there's at some point it's interesting you touch on the therapy thing. I'm definitely not a therapist, and that's a hugely involved skill set all of its own. But I wonder if sometimes there's a bit of catharsis that happens in those conversations, because it's the chance to talk all about your brand and the frustrations with it. And I think often, sometimes when it comes to talking about your brand, we often feel we have to put on a front and to say, yes, I've got it completely figured out. Yes, I know exactly what I'm doing. And I think that what the pandemic offered was an opportunity for a lot of companies to pivot in ways that they maybe hadn't felt they had permission to before. Obviously, practically, a lot of us had to do it because we had to make sure that we were able to serve our customers with the needs that they had now. But actually, for a lot of people, I think it gave them an opportunity to kind of test out new waters and decide on new things and invest in areas they've maybe thought, actually, I don't have the time to do that right now. So it's been really interesting to see how things are going to change as we head back out into the sort of the world of the face-to-face, as it were.
Yeah, it's such a useful skill as well. I know you said you're not a therapist in there, but I wonder, it's some respects, it was the same word that came to mind for me, Chris, in terms of helping the organization or business understand who they are, what's their identity, beyond the labels that they can rationally kind of place to themselves. And it's very much in the same way. Like, I'm a transformational coach, and one of the main areas that I work with people are about their own values and who they are. And like, when someone goes, who are you? What do you do? We had a lady on, Chris, a few weeks ago who was talking about it's the human equivalent of the dog bum sniff. We say, what do you do for a living? To figure out, like, who are you as a person? Like, I'm an accountant, okay, I'm a coach, I'm a footballer, as if like that's who they are as a person. And I wonder whether a lot of what you're trying to do is potentially trying to just unpick that. So you're an accountant, okay, so you're trustworthy and you're good with numbers. I get it. That kind of comes inherent with that title. But what else is there under there from an emotional angle that we can use to help people get to who you are at your core as a company, which I absolutely love. And I think you can't get enough of that, whether it's at an individual level or as an organization. Both parties are going to work predominantly better, or far, far better, as a result of knowing that, because you can't unknow it once you hear it as well.
Exactly. And I think that's just brilliant, because when you get to the things that motivate you underneath the surface, you stop being a two-dimensional person and you start being a three-dimensional one. And when you can unpick and uncover some of the things that you're motivated by, it makes you more purposeful as a result, because you have now made what is subconscious conscious. And that's a huge part of the linguistic work that I do, is about offering that consciousness around the language that we use. So some of the practical stuff that I do, if I'm auditing a website for a client and I'm looking at kind of what do they want to do? Do they want to be more inclusive and welcoming? Do they want to bring new people into the business and what they do? So a lot of kind of public institutions, museums, galleries and things like that often want to kind of really, as they should, broaden their audiences and engage more people and bring them in. And sometimes the work on websites, we often use words that prevent us from reaching that goal, because subconsciously we have either narratives or biases or inherent ideas about what people might be interested in that show up in our language, whether we realize it or not. So you look at a website, for example, for, say, a luxury brand, and they want to be seen as really aspirational and kind of rare and sort of really desirable. But on the website, they've used words like affordable, one get one free. So the percentage of words on their website are actually sabotaging the message they want to be putting across. And we don't realize it, because there's something going on underneath when we are writing, if we're not conscious around our language, that will show up, which is why speed writing exercises are really exciting, third-party auditing, consulting, all of the stuff that we do. But it's so important to look and say, what am I really saying about myself? And like you said, Darren, when it comes to unpicking people's values in the brand, the values of who they are as a person, beyond being, oh, I'm just a footballer, great, but what do you believe in? When you make that conscious, you can start living that deliberately. And then you can be a footballer that also really cares about their community and shows up for the people around them and back to loyalty and sets an example or goes into local schools, and that you are suddenly so much more than your job title. And I think certainly with my generation and with the generation Gen Z, I think a lot of us set store by our work, and our work and our identity become intrinsically linked. And then we wonder why we don't feel fulfilled, because you're saying, oh, I'm a marketing manager. Great. And, you know, what if you were a marketing manager with the biggest heart in the agency, or you were the person that wanted to go out and take your marketing skills, and I'm not saying, you know, in terms of Pollyanna, Miss Universe, off you go, get your award, but what are you doing deliberately beyond your job title? Because that's when you start to create an identity for yourself, rather than have your value handed to the people that respond to your work. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, is that when you work in, you know, any company, any business, and your identity is based on your work digitally, and you can't always see the results of the 8.5 hours you spent at your desk, you don't feel like you've achieved anything. So your value, your personal value, your sense of self-worth goes down, it decreases. And I think that looking at, you know, the values that you have and how do I live those every day, suddenly begins to expand the value you think of that you hold, and gives you a chance to do it more deliberately. And I feel like that was a bit of a ramble, but I hope it makes sense. Sorry.
I love that ramble.
Yeah. Eloise, I know you quite well, so I know that you like a ramble as well, so that's fantastic. I mean, that was an interesting point of view. So I'm going to can come back a second as well. So have you always been this intrinsically motivated to help people from a young age, or is this something that's evolved as you've got a bit older? And another question is, did you feel that because I know you've worked in agencies as well, did you feel that you needed to step away from the agent world to see at firsthand the kind of impact you were going to make on a client's business and life?
Those are such good questions. Have I always wanted to help people? I hope so. I think I was probably a bit of a doofus as a kid, so I highly doubt it. I was probably far too busy running around my parents' garden pretending to be a Pokemon. At the age of 16, no. But there's definitely...
This was just last month.
Shh, don't tell anyone. This isn't even my final form. No, but there's definitely... I think I've always wanted to help people, and I think I've always wanted to... And maybe it's a bit self-indulgent in the sense that, you know, I hope that I have something that can be of value to others, and certainly that seems what I do with my client work. It's definitely something I do now. It might not have always been something I've wanted to do, but my parents have both impressed on me the importance of giving what you have to other people however you can, in a way that they need, because it's not just about you shouldn't be like, I'm going to help you with my superhero cape on. It's about stopping and saying, what do you need? So in the past, I've done, you know, I've done volunteering with sort of, you know, local high school, and have gone in and helped with some classes there. I did some teaching over in Corsica. I became a spin coach, and when I was living in Canada, volunteered at the YMCA because I know how to party, and taught spin classes there. And that was, you know, so it's just, but actually to me, that was more about making connections with the community rather than being seen as someone who helps out. I don't think I really wanted the optics of the sort of the presentation of being someone who was helpful. I think I just like being around people. I just like showing up for people. And as you've probably gathered, I'm something of an extrovert. So that's definitely where I get a lot of my energy from. And in terms of the agency world, the agency that I worked for, Lux, the food and drink agency based in Leith, run by Vari McLeod and Alice Will, phenomenal agency, phenomenal people, genuinely.
That's a bit of a shout out there, wasn't it?
A little bit, yeah, it was. No, they are really, it was a remarkable place, and I'm always going to be grateful to them because I learned so much in the just shy of 2.5 years that I was there. And as an agency, Lux was sort of small but perfectly formed, and worked with some really amazing clients: Brewdog, Edinburgh Gin, Zero Waste Scotland, Lidl, you know, a whole variety of really big name brands. But then I also had the opportunity to work directly with smaller brands, and one of my favorite clients will always be the Bay Fish and Chips in Stonehaven. So if I can have my second chat. The Bay Fish and Chips in Stonehaven, Callum Richardson, who is the founder of them and managing director of the Bay, he does the best, and I'm biased, but he does the best fish and chips possibly in the entire world, but definitely in the UK. And I remember we did brand management work at Lux, and we had Callum was voted, or the Bay was voted, Britain's best eating experience in the Lonely Planet's 2018 guide, I think it was. Wow. And it was the best. First of all, it was the kind of the highest ranked British entry, and then it was also the highest ranked fish and chip entry. So, you know, we were able to extrapolate. So obviously it's the best in Britain, and it's the best fish and chips in the world. But what I loved about working with Callum was actually his green credentials. So he is all about giving back to the planet, and the length this business goes to figure out how we can be more sustainable, and not just sustainable, but what we can do to give back. So it's actually regenerative. It's not just sustainability. And everything from, we filter off the potato starch when we cut chips and we send it for scraps to feed farm animals, for livestock, and we can tell you the number plate of the boat that the fish came off that morning, and all of these different things in a way that so much of his food came from a 50-mile radius. It was incredible to see, and really inspiring to see what could be done in the area around you. And I think that community sense, to see, and Callum was such a big part of the community, to see that recognized and rewarded, so to speak, was just the best thing ever. And he was a real believer in that, the new generation, the generation that he was bringing in to the Bay to learn to fry fish, and that hospitality is a really viable career. And I don't think, sorry, another bandwagon, but I don't think enough people recognize things like hospitality and the food and drink industry as being places where you can forge a really rewarding, respected career. And I think that's a UK thing. And I think that, places, in Europe, and certainly in places like Japan and overseas, there are places where the culture of hospitality is so prized, as it should be. But over here, I think we tend to take it for granted. So to see Callum in a fish and chip shop encouraging people to come in and forge a really rewarding career with him was just the best thing ever. And that, in that sense, I think it was in his nature just to give back to people. So the agency world, working in food and drink, was a way of looking at the hospitality industry and saying, how can we celebrate so much of what's done here? And I think, again, in the UK, our food culture, we're growing one and developing one now, but there's so much to celebrate that. Working with Lux, being passionate about food and drink, it was a match made in heaven for me. So I was doing stuff that I loved on the communications side with big and small companies that were really doing, setting incredible examples. And it was a phenomenal experience. I learned a huge amount there.
And what drove the decision to leave and I guess to move out in the big bad world, I guess, yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually, my former partner had an opportunity to move to Canada. He was doing some work with a tech company that had landed a contract in Ontario, and he said, did I fancy going abroad? He was invited to go and work on that project permanently, but sort of 2-3 years out in Canada. Did I fancy going with him to Toronto for 6 months? And I said, yes, that's great. And I'd always toyed with the idea of potentially going freelance, and with my passion for food and drink and for the kind of hospitality sector, I thought, well, I can write stuff, good. So let's go off and try and be a freelance food and drink journalist. And as you can probably tell from that sentence, didn't do a brilliant job. And I pitched in articles and I wrote about different things, but there are other people who are so much better. And honestly, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, I don't know that I had the guts and the resilience that you need when you're getting started to pitch in articles every single day. There's a creativity that comes with, well, what's the story here? What's the angle? What's differentiating us from the next, particular business? So I realized I was not brilliantly suited / rubbish at pitching in food articles that got the notice of editors and the places that I wanted to write for. And at this point, I was working as a board member of a charity called the What Why Children in Hospital charity. And What Why Children in Hospital are brilliant. They make videos for a whole variety of different hospital procedures, basically to help kids and parents feel more in control when they go in for something like an MRI. So if you're 6 years old and you've never been in an MRI before, and you're sort of, strapped, I don't think you're strapped to a board, but you are, it's claustrophobic, there are strange noises, you're terrified the thing might fall on top of you. So What Why Children in Hospital make videos that show children going to have real procedures. Obviously, everything's completely consensual and recorded and very, very respectful. And some stuff can be a bit concerning, but it's things like what happens when you get a nasogastric tube fitted, or what happens if you go for an echocardiogram. And the different things that happen are made in such a child-friendly way, but it also helps to reassure parents that have no idea what happens when you go in. So you can't answer your child's question of, is it going to hurt? Will I wake up if I have a general anesthetic? All of these different things. So working with the board, I had taken on their social media activity and mainly to kind of, whilst I was building up the freelance portfolio, keep my hand in, so to speak. No one likes the gap in their CV, but also it was really genuinely rewarding work to do. And one of the things that kind of popped into my head was the Bay Fish and Chips had a parliamentary motion in recognition of their work, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I could just email some MPs and see if we couldn't get the work of What Why Children in Hospital recognised. So I sent an email to all of them, and huge support came out of that activity. And we had a parliamentary motion passed in October 2019 recognising the phenomenal work of the charity. Wow. And it got me thinking, with a carefully worded email, we were able to get a great result. And whether or not, parliamentary motions are passed out left, right and centre, I don't know. Whether it was a lucky day, I'm not sure. But there was something in the call to action that had got a response from not just one MP, but from so many of them, that I thought there might be something here in the email that encourages and inspires people to get in touch. And my background is in linguistics. In terms of my academic background, very much, focused on a whole variety of things, and I could bore everyone to tears when it comes to linguistics, so I shan't do that here. But when it comes to looking objectively at language, how do we make language into something that we can measure, and how do we turn it into things that we can replicate to get great results? And in that sense, it's a lot like conversion copywriting, for example, but it tends to go a little bit deeper. And I thought, there might be something here in terms of the linguistic love that I've had that's underpinned all of the work that I've done in my career to date. How could I turn that into a service that's going to help other businesses and hopefully create great results for similar companies? So I got back from Canada in January of 2020, just as the pandemic is starting to begin its rumblings. Moved back in with my parents whilst I was flat hunting in Edinburgh. And I was applying for jobs at the same time. So my tourist visa had expired, and I didn't get they turned me down for a working visa, which I was terribly distressed by. But then moved into my parents and thought, well, I need to find a job. So I was doing the job hunting and the interviewing and all the rest, and getting turned down left, right and centre. And then I realised, well, actually, do you know what? There are people that I can hopefully support. The charity brought me on as a paid support for social media activity. And then I landed a client from a reference of someone I had met in Canada who was looking for website and communications and branding support. And that was the beginning of it. And that was one client. It led to a second client. I started to network my socks off when it came to LinkedIn, and when it came to meeting a few people in person before we went into lockdown in March. Obviously wasn't going to move into the city in lockdown in March, didn't have enough of an income to go on. Hiring got a little bit iffy, and I thought, I just have to make this work. So really started to kind of accelerate and hit the ground running from March 2020 onwards. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't love agency life or that I didn't love being a part of Lux, but the opportunity to move overseas, and those 6 months were just incredible. But then the chance also to kind of organically find what I was good at from a linguistics perspective, and then make that valuable for other people was a really interesting learning curve. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
There is so much in that, Eloise, from that one ramble. Honestly, I've taken about 10 bits of notes here to try and catch up on. But I mean, the biggest thing I've got here is you seem to thrive and love being able to help and impact a community as well. Going from the chip shop all the way to What Why Children charity. It seems like you've got this real passion. Even the spin class stuff, you see you're an extrovert, but you're an extrovert for the right reasons as well. You're not just kind of the perception is reality of what you're actually doing here, which is fantastic. And the concept of kind of finding your way organically into what you're good at has been fantastic as well. And it sounds like having that family network and that support around you to be able to come home and have your dad dropping off coffee gives you that opportunity and that support structure to then thrive in what you're doing. And it just shows that once you've had one good referral, then that good notion of your good work just knocks on to the next one.
Definitely. I think that I've been able to do a huge amount of what I have been able to do because of the people around me. And I think that part of the work that I do is about hopefully being that person for someone else, and kind of pay forward a lot of what I've been given, because a lot of what I have been given is not necessarily on my own merit. There's a chance, not a chance, there's a sense that you get where people take a chance on you when you begin as a freelancer, and I feel like a lot of my clients have done that for me, and I think there's that you get a sense of how much trust there is involved in engaging someone new for the first time. And that makes those referrals so much more meaningful, because you know that they were working with you initially, and maybe you didn't have that reputation that, you know, people can come to rely on now, or that they know about before they meet you, but that trust that is involved. So when you get that great result, and I think it makes you want to work harder for people as well. You know, with my clients, I recognize that I'm being given an opportunity to help, and I work with a lot of freelancers and self-employed people as well. There is so much value, not just value, but there's so much that is valuable about someone trusting you with the language of their business, because the language of the business is often how people interact with that business for the first time. You're kind of like the director of first impressions, if you will. And there's something really humbling, I think, actually, about being given that opportunity, and it makes me want to work, hopefully, so much harder to get those great results. But yeah, it's daunting too. You know, I recognize that when there are sometimes wobbles or hiccups, or the copy's not perfect first time round, I like to go away and beat myself with the cricket bat, self-flagellate. How dare! And I think there's been a lesson there in learning how can you balance what's good and what's over delivery and what's not quality. And when you're the only person in that business, it's really difficult to trust that you're going to get it right every single time. And when there is negative feedback from a client on occasion, how do you make that right? How do you balance that? How do you get back up into the saddle after you've been knocked down? And that's been a real learning curve in the last sort of year and a half, 2 years as well.
And I just want to touch on that. You've beautifully kind of, I guess, described the point I was going to just make, in the sense that there's been a bit of a personal journey. Like you had to have, you mentioned grit and resilience and the lack of it, but actually you took a decision to take a risk and move to Canada. And ultimately your vacation out there, and well, not a vacation out there, but you're ultimately back here. You got kicked back out of the country. You're moving in with parents, which, you know, as you said, you know, 30-year-old, you're like, that's dream. I know your tongue was firmly in cheek, but there's a certain amount of resilience and toughness and grit that you've shown in order to get to that point. And actually, therefore, decisions after that, in order to help other people, kind of, it almost puts them into some form of context. So hearing you describe that it's difficult, you've got to pick yourself back up with clients if you get negative feedback. I mean, that is a bit like life in general, and maybe a part of the personal journey. I'm drawing a parallel to say, actually, that's something that might have helped frame the context to enable you to go and build a thriving business.
Yeah, I think I love all of that. And I think that there's something really powerful in the idea that, and it sounds super obvious, but our life echoes our work and vice versa. The way that you approach your work is probably indicative of how you approach things in your life. The way you approach things in your life is probably indicative of how you approach things at work. And someone can give me the Miss Obvious award for that one. I don't mind at all. But there's a real power in deciding as well what your attitude is going to be to things. And I think that if I've got any kind of takeaways or anything that I would personally, not, again, this sounds super obnoxious, but if I consider anything to be a personal superpower, it's optimism and bounce back ability. Not necessarily veering into the realm of toxic positivity, because there's a lot to be said for ignoring bad situations because you don't want to engage with them. That's not what optimism is. Optimism is looking at that crappy situation and thinking, what is the best possible outcome that I could try and make happen? And can I handle anything that comes my way or that doesn't go my way? Yes, I can, actually. And I think that being able to look at something, I mean, it's that classic Susan Jeffords, feel the fear and do it anyway. You can handle yourself. I think a lot of the time we tend to believe the lie that we can't do hard things. And I think if there's anything that my career journey has shown me, is that we can do hard stuff. We can do really difficult things. We can leave bad relationships, and we can say no to work environments that we maybe have outgrown or that we can't serve as well as we could anymore. You know, we can leave degrees that don't work well for us. We can say no to those friendships that are really bringing you down. And that's not betrayal. It's honesty. And there's something really fundamental about that when you bring that to your work, in your work relationships as well. And this is something that I've had to try and learn, is to be confident and firm in the quality of the work that I do. Sometimes, you'll get clients that say this copy is poor, but they won't tell you why. So rather than be flattened by that kind of conversation, you need to think to yourself, okay, so what's the backstory here? What do I need to read into to understand what's going on? If the copy is genuinely poor, can I handle that situation? Yes, I can, absolutely. All amends will be made at my expense, on my time, to the highest standard, and sincerest apologies to the team for the inconvenience. If it is that you have misperceived what the copy should be at this stage, can I handle that? Yes, I can. We're going to walk you through a feedback process that helps you understand why the copy is not ready to go on your website, for example. Or is it an interpersonal issue, and we need to have a frank conversation about what it's right for you to expect. Is it that you don't like the copy? Okay, it's fine that you don't like the copy. Does the copy meet its intended purpose of engaging people and getting them to take an action that you want them to do? I don't care if you don't like it. Does it work? Yes, great. Okay, we can handle that. And I think it's that, can I handle the situations that come up? That to me is true grit and optimism. Yeah. To prepare for, I think a lot of folks say, expect the worst and prepare for the best. If you expect the worst, your mind looks for evidence of the things you choose to believe. I would much rather anticipate for the best and prepare for the best, and I'll just handle whatever happens when it comes. If you worry twice, you put a waste of time, right? And time is finite.
Yeah. I think that's so well put, honestly. I mean, even the feedback cycle, we're all privy to that as well in our life experience as well. But there's something about just having a conversation with somebody. Sometimes when you receive an email, it can seem quite blunt and quite frank. But when you unpick it, you have a conversation, you understand it can be minute differences that you need to kind of just find a kind of even ground. But I like that confidence as well. Sometimes you've got to say, this does fit the bill, this is right. And unfortunately, sometimes people are too emotionally connected to it or too close to it. And once they step back, and that's why it's good to get other people's views on it, people who aren't close to it and don't have that emotional connection as well. But I think that's fantastic. One question I was going to ask before we jump on other stuff, because we're talking about the client and what they look at. Have you got any tips for your kind of clients or you work with, or is there any kind of recurring themes that you could maybe pass on as a kind of knowledge share for some people that they could take away from this conversation?
Definitely. So in the context of maybe the feedback cycle, I think that's something that I really benefited from other freelancers' experience when it came to me helping my clients understand the feedback cycle. So the whole point of feedback is to really improve and hone and polish the document. So from a copywriting perspective, when we're giving feedback, one of the first things we need to look at is this accurate? Is this an accurate representation of what I've been asked to do? Is this an accurate and appropriate response to the brief? And that, creatively, that could go for anything: a piece of design work, a website design or wireframe, a copywriting document, an email, a graphic, whatever. Is this accurate? Is this congruent with the brand's tone of voice? Is this in line with what I've been asked to do? Yes, great, okay. So it doesn't matter that stylistically you might not be 100% a fan of this. It might not matter that it's a rough draft initially. Does it look and sound enough like you? Is it accurate enough that we can work from here? If so, fantastic. What you don't want to do is do the accuracy at the end, when you've taken the time to go through those stylistic comments and to consider the kind of copy editing or proofreading part of it. You want to do accuracy at the beginning because it means that your course correction is minimal. Then you want to look at the sort of copy editing, proofing, polishing. Would we use that word? Would we not use that word? Why not? What's the difference? Have we represented our tone of voice enough here? And then at the end, you look at it stylistically and you say, are there any minor stylistic shifts I would make? If not, bang, job done, off it goes. One of the things that was really, that I would advocate that everybody does before they begin a piece of work, especially as a freelancer, is to articulate your feedback process to your client and tell them why it's important. Because issues happen when the feedback formula or the feedback process happens out of sync. So if you do stylistic amends before you do accuracy, that's really difficult and confusing for the person that's trying to give you accuracy feedback to filter through. Check if it's accurate first, then move on to stylistic and copy editing. It's just when you don't articulate the feedback cycle to your client or the feedback process to your client, you don't give them the chance to have their expectations managed, and you leave them in the dark as to what it is that they've been required to feedback on. And feedback it's time consuming, Ideally, it should only really be done once. And it's one of those kind of things, if you can make it less of a burden for your client, they're going to have a much better time signing off your copy if they know what's expected of them. And it saves you from things like, I don't like it. Or say, Marjorie from finance coming in and killing your copy by committee. Absolutely
Marjorie.
no one.
It's always Marjorie, isn't it?
Always Marjorie.
I've got flashbacks there.
But
I've got flashbacks there, Chris, to our days in the energy industry. It's like the amount of I don't like that. No, that doesn't work.
Or can you make it more sexy, please? Oof, that's
Can you make the logo bigger? No.
But so something in that though is about, like, ultimately it's inherent in the fact that's been outsourced to you. So like your clients are telling you effectively by hiring you, look, I need my hand to be held. I need you to manage this process for me. So almost you've got a responsibility to show them, well, this is the governance piece that I can help you to understand how I work. And I want to get the best result for you. And I go through that process through my feedback, like accuracy, copy, stylistic, and that all rationally completely like makes sense to me. Like that's what I would look for, I guess, as a business owner, because it gives me confidence that you know what you're doing as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it makes your life easier, which is the most important thing. Doing business with someone shouldn't be a burden. Feedback can be onerous enough without the entire process around it being a nightmare. And I think that sometimes, and again, I can only speak from my own experience, but I wonder if sometimes there's this kind of, we don't talk about the talking enough. So in linguistics, we have a concept called meta-language or meta-linguistics, and that is just talking about talking. So when it comes to feedback, it's okay to manage that by saying, here's what I need from you, and this is why. There's nothing wrong with saying, this is how I want you to give me the feedback that I need to make this the best for you. And it's the same with, it was a Dave Trott that said, give me the creative freedom of a tight brief. This is why, is because, and when you, and also one of my favorite words, because, although that makes me sound like an absolute idiot, but genuinely, when you're writing copy, if you can give a clause and a because and then a reason, people will take so much authority, such a sense of authority from that, because you've told them why. And I think so often we assume that people know why, and often they don't, or they need to kind of that little bit of clarification. And people are scared of looking stupid, so they don't want to check their understanding necessarily. So if you can bring in this culture of meta language, talking about the whys behind the what we're doing, you help everyone to be on the same page. And ultimately, that, I think a lot of consultants are sometimes seen as enemies by business or by people internal to a business, because, oh, you're not one of us, you're not in here, you're going to take my job, or you're not part of our lunch club, you can't sit with us. But actually, we are all on the same team. We all want the same thing. And rather than it being me versus you, which gratefully I've never had that experience with a client, but I could understand how it might occur. And this is also not an excuse for people to run roughshod over you, but we are all on the same team, and we do all need to work towards the same goal ultimately, which is delivering really brilliant results for your business.
I absolutely love that. I love how we said, is there any tips to the clients, if you like, and you mentioned, I love that clause, because, and reason. But I love how you've mentioned, is there any tips to the clients, but actually the onus is back on the individual who's initiating that, or not initiating that piece of work, who's taking out that piece of work. So the freelancer, no matter if it's a copywriter, a designer, a consultant, or some other person, to make sure they're honest and they have that structure in place to advise the client of the feedback loop. Because the last thing you want to do is receive a WhatsApp message that's got some feedback on it, and then receive an email, and then receive a text message, and receive a scanned bit of paper with notes all over, all this kind of stuff. You want it to be clear and concise and easy to understand as well, and having that conversation. So I think that's brilliant. So the onus is on the freelancer or the individual to make sure they're clear and make sure their client understands that, and to make sure that if there's a certain amount of amends beyond 1, 2, or maybe even 3, then these are paid for amends if it's a complete restructure. And they're so emotionally attached to it that they can't see the woods for the trees, then you've got to have confidence in yourself as well.
You do. You really do. And I think that's the other thing, is that freelancers, we're equals. You are equal with that business. You might be offering a service, but you're not in a position of servitude. And you absolutely have to avoid and mitigate things like scope creep. And the way that I do that is I am very, very open and honest with my clients when I'm making a proposal or I'm crafting a contract for them. This amount of work includes 2 rounds of amends, no more, no less, 2 rounds of amends. I'm going to aim to get it as close to perfect as the first time that I can, but I understand there will be things, phrases that I might use that may not be congruent with your brand. It might be that I've accidentally used a UK English rather than a US or a Canadian English term, or that there's a particular technological concept that's more appropriate for you to guide me on. So I'm going to get it 95% perfect. That's what I'm aiming for. And then that second round is let's polish and perfect. But I'm not going to do any more than that, because that's when you start to doubt my abilities. You change the brief, you change the scope, and you wind up with something that is so far away from what you initially asked me to do that I'm not serving you anymore. I'm not supporting you anymore in the way that you brought me in to do. And I think that one of the greatest things that I learned from the freelancing community is that, and also everyone check out the copywriting community on Twitter. They are the most incredible bunch of people. And I hesitate, I do copywriting services. I hesitate to call myself a copywriter. I really am. I'm a linguist and a consultant, and that's what I do. But the copywriting community on Twitter, Copywriters UK, if you want to search for that hashtag, they are incredible. They are some of the most generous people I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. And every Tuesday, 11 a.m. So directly after this morning, no, today's Wednesday, Eloise. Never mind, scratch that. Eloise doesn't know how to tell the time. But every Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. there's something called Content Club UK, where copywriters get together for a half-hour chat and talk about different things relating to business. And some weeks it might be pricing, some weeks it might be, how do you find new clients? How do you do this particular kind of B2B sales writing, whatever. But they all encourage you to have confidence in your skills. People wouldn't hire you if they didn't think you could do the job. They buy from you emotionally, and then they justify it logically afterwards. So first of all, you've got an emotional resonance and a confidence there. You now need to keep that going throughout the entire life cycle of your work. You need to be confident but not arrogant in the services that you provide. And you need to be able to put your hands up and say one of two things: either, yes, I'm right and here's why, or no, I got that wrong, I'm so sorry, let's get it fixed. And I think that remembering that you're allowed to make mistakes, as long as you're honest about them and correct them immediately and at your own expense, that's okay. I think that it forges better rapport. But it's equally important to say, actually, you hired me for this service because I've delivered great work for people like you in the past. This is how what I do works, and this is why I know it works. And if that's not what you wanted, then maybe we need to revisit the brief, or maybe there's a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding of what's been asked of each party. And that's why that meta language is so important. Because if you have that, then you're able to defend yourself later, which sounds awful to have to do. It's less about defending yourself and more about reinforcing your position as an authority and a professional. And I think that's something that the copywriter community really gave me, was that sense of be encouraged, because actually you do know what you're doing and you're really good at it. So keep going and learn from this. And yeah, you can handle it. So you're going to be fine.
I think that might be a really nice point to kind of nearly finish off the podcast. But I was going to ask a couple of more things, actually. Can you just explain to the audience, I know, but just to the audience, the reason behind your brand name and what your brand name is? Because I absolutely love this. I think it's just such a clever concept.
Oh, charmer. So olim is a Latin word that means once. And it was used in a couple of different contexts. And the first one is obviously in that storytelling sense of once upon a time. But it also goes sort of etymologically that olim was used in I think it was the Roman Praetorium, where it was basically said in front of the senators to shut your face and listen, because we're about to say something really, really important. And I love that, because the idea of olim of my business, all of my clients have something really important to say, and I want to be something that helps people sit up and listen to it. Yeah, it was, again, credit my dad for that one. He's really the sort of secret silent partner in all of this success, I have to say.
So to get that in the background.
Shout out to Richard Leeson. But yeah, olim, there you have it. Shut up and listen. We're going to say something super important, senator style.
Yeah, and even in that, I guess you've given so much. Well, your dad's given so much thought and given you a cracking idea, but obviously it gets across your brand and the message as well. So it ticks the box, but the importance of kind of giving that thought behind how you're trying to serve your customers from an emotional point of view is fantastic. So yeah.
Perfect. And where can everyone find you, Eloise? Apart
You
from
can find me-
apart from Edinburgh, obviously. So.
apart from lurking around all the coffee shops in Edinburgh, you can find me at olimcoms.com. So OLIMCOMMS.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Eloise Leeson. And if you're Olimcoms on Instagram, which I update very rarely. But if anyone wants to talk anything linguistics, have a chat. Email is always open, and I would love to talk to you about sociolinguistics and meta-language and all of these other wonderful things. Or if you just have a burning weird question about copy, would love to hear from anybody who wants to get in touch.
Fantastic. We'll put all those details in the show notes as well, as with Lux and all the other ones, What Why, Children Charity and everyone else, and we'll put all that in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming, Eloise. It was fantastic. Great experience. I'm sure our listeners will take a lot from that, especially tips more about the onus on the individual who's been the freelancer, which I found was fantastic as well, and the clause, because and reason. Great tip I've taken away as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Eloise. It's been great to have you and great to meet you.
You too.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Pop Pod this week. If you'd like to leave a review or share the podcast with others, then that'd be awesome. You'll find us on Instagram at the Pop Pod, and on Facebook we have a community group called Purpose to Progress that anyone can join. And we'll be back every Monday with a new episode, but until then, stay on purpose and we'll see you next week.